Good morning. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and last night I saw Neil Jordan's new vampire film, Byzantium. When I say new, I mean newer than Interview with the Vampire, which Neil Jordan directed almost 20 years ago. But Byzantium has been making its rounds in the indie film circuit since the end of last year. And this week finally came out for limited release in the US. 2012 was the year of the vampire movie, but 2013 has been sorely lacking, and I thirst for vampire movies. My needs must be sated. Byzantium is the first vampire film we've gotten since the last Twilight movie came out, and it's not even in most theaters. It's only limited release. I had the chance to see it at the IFC Art House Theater in New York City, but chances are it's not playing near you unless you live in New York or LA. Needless to say, I have been looking forward to this film for quite a while. Byzantium's been advertised as being unique in that it focuses on a mother-daughter vampire relationship, which got me excited because vampires, women, feminism, it's what we do. We had a mother-daughter vampire movie last year with Underworld Awakening, but in the Underworld franchise, gender plays a very small role in the characters and their stories. It's this futuristic world where gender issues are either ignored or non-existent. Over the past 6 months, Byzantium's been lauded for being so different from Blade Underworld-style vampire action movies or Twilight-style vampire romances. It's about family relationships, except it's not. Byzantium is about an emo 200-year-old vampire who feels lonely and wants to share her story because she's conflicted about the nature of her existence. Where have we seen this story before? It's Interview with a Vampire, but with women! Gender swapping does not make something unique. And the I hate my vampire maker dynamic is lost. What is the relationship between Eleanor and her mother, Clara? They muddle through their existence, bitch and moan, but still, they don't have a forward momentum of seeking answers or finding love. It's just survival for them. And so they survive. But what comes next? And why do we, as an audience, care? The lack of momentum in their existence paints a pretty bleak picture, but is bleakness the point? Interview with a Vampire was bleak, but bleakness wasn't the point of the whole story. Vampires that just putter around without any interesting motivations only work when it's not the vampire's story, but when the story is of the human who encounters them, like in Let the Right One In, for example. And honestly, I've seen movies with 16-year-olds having mommy issues that have way more developed stories and characters than these two have had after 200 years to cultivate those issues and complexities. But their relationship barely scratches the surface. It feels to me like scriptwriter Moira Buffini, who also wrote the original young adult play the film's based on, thought, wouldn't it be unique if, rather than actually writing this mother-daughter relationship from a real place of some kind of vulnerability? Eleanor's vampire issues aren't with being a monster or being timeless or having a disappointing mother, no. Her morose emo comes from having to keep her secret, which is valid, but it seems shallow when all the other things that could be causing her issues are just brushed aside. For instance, okay, spoilers start here, so if you think you're actually going to see this movie, be warned. There is a scene where Eleanor recalls a traumatic event that happens to her where she was raped by the same man who raped her mother when she was a girl and turned her into a whore. And she is very upset. It's framed as very traumatizing for her. But then, this trauma doesn't actually affect her character in any way. It doesn't influence her relationship with men. It doesn't influence her relationship with her mother in a positive or negative way. They don't bond over it. She doesn't blame her for it. You don't see it coming back to haunt her. It's mentioned, but then it doesn't actually play into her character. As opposed to Clara, who's the truly dynamic character in this. When Clara becomes a vampire, she says from the start that she wants to use her newfound power and strength to become a vigilante against the men who hurt women in the way she has been hurt. But then she fuels the very thing she's fighting against by having her vampire life revolve around using sex as a way of income, by being a whore and by running a brothel and bringing other women into her brothel to be abused by men in the same way that she was. Clara is a tragic failure of a person, which is interesting and I don't think is a failure in the writing, but I have to ask, what is the point? Is it to show that despite good intentions and wanting to overcome, we cannot escape? Or that there's a futility in the idea of change when it's compared with Eleanor's idea of change? Or is it because Clara is unworthy of change? Maybe it's that despite all the good intentions of someone's the reason why you should succeed, sometimes you just fail, and it's not because you have a weak character or anything you can control. But that's the main problem. You see, Clara, despite being the impulsive one, the outgoing one, the trashy one, the one who uses sex as her weapon instead of the demure, quiet Eleanor who just sits in the corner and broods all the time, is that it's not ultimately a flaw, a character flaw for Clara. She doesn't fall into these bad ways because she just can't help herself, or she has a weak moral compass, or she's messed up. She does it as a means to an end, and it's not shown as something that she should actually overcome. She's shown as misunderstood, and the person who's in the wrong is Eleanor for not understanding her mother and not accepting her and respecting her for taking care of her in the way she does. Eleanor says there are other ways, we can do other things, but it's shown that she's wrong. And being that Eleanor is ultimately the protagonist of this movie, she is the flawed one who takes Clara's sacrifices for granted like a spoiled teenager, but we don't ever get to see Eleanor grow from it. When it comes to want versus need and character development and so forth, what Eleanor wants is to share her secrets so that she doesn't feel lonely, and what she does in the movie is ultimately that. And what she needs is to come to accept and respect her mother, or reject her completely and overcome the protective relationship her mother has. And she doesn't do either of those things. In the climax of the movie, Eleanor decides to leave Clara in her sexy ways and live her own life her own way, but then they get attacked by this brotherhood of old vampires who are hunting them because female vampires aren't allowed to exist nor create other vampires. So either way, they're screwed. And in the climax, they get attacked, they get abducted, they almost get killed, and then they escape. And even though Eleanor was trying to leave Clara, after the climax, they come back together, and they hug, and they love each other, and then Clara decides to let Eleanor go, and go live with the man she just met, so that Eleanor can go live with the boy that she likes. And I don't feel that Eleanor's actually learned or changed or grown in any way in respect to her mother and the way she feels about her. Yes, she was gonna leave her and then she decided not to, but that's because she was scared and she loves her and she cares about her. Of course she doesn't want her head to get chopped off, but it doesn't come across that she actually sees her mother differently. If you're going to tell a life story of a supernatural creature like a vampire, you have to make it more interesting than I exist. Make it, I did something. Making this Eleanor story is kind of where the script writing fails. Vampire stories of I exist, isn't that creepy and unnatural, don't faze us anymore. We've seen them all already. By the time Eleanor finally does do something impactful, tells her story to her human boyfriend Frank, and then decides she's going to turn him into a vampire too, that's where the movie ends. You see her taking him off to go do it, credits. By the time she's actually gone through all this stuff where she's decided she's going to actually do something in a way that actually has a consequence and not, I told my story and then the person I told it to died, which all the consequences in this movie are swept away like that. The movie ends. What would have made this good was if the story had been about the consequences of what happens after she does that. Let us see her take her human boyfriend and turn him into a vampire, and have someone now to share her story with and to tell her, express herself to, and what happens? How does that play out? Does it work for her? Doesn't it? I bet it doesn't quite work out the way she thought it would be. That's the movie I wanted to see, and it's not the movie we got. The movie we got was trying to tell this creepy, dark, gothic story we've seen so many times before. And the thing that made me snort out loud in the theater was this section where Eleanor's teachers are reading her story, and they're like, oh my god, the writing in the story is so amazing. It's like Mary Shelley and Edgar Allan Poe had a creepy, gothic baby, and it's the story, and it's the script praising itself. Where does it get off doing that when the story it's telling is a bit cliche and tired? And yeah, Mary Shelley and Edgar Allan Poe were unique and original back in the day, but guess what? By now it's become a bit cliche and a bit... We've seen it before, and you can't say this is so amazing and brilliant when you're talking about something that's been done so many times. There's also this scene where Eleanor's trying to get her teacher to believe that she really is 200 years old, and the teacher's not buying it, so Eleanor starts giving her this intense look, and you see the teacher starting to react to it. But whereas it might be that the filmmakers are trying to express that, oh, she looks so timeless, and you can see wisdom in her eyes, and she looks so old, and is a 200-year-old woman looking out the eyes of a 16-year-old girl. No, it was just a 16-year-old girl staring at you from the screen, and a teacher going, oh, there was nothing done, and that kind of sage solemnness doesn't convey that same kind of eerie otherworldliness that perhaps it might have the first 18 times this was done. It seemed like this story was something that just worked a lot better on paper than perhaps it did in the actual execution of the film, and maybe the play was better, but it did not translate to the screen. And having the playwright adapt her own play into a screenplay, I think, is where most of the problems came from. And that being said, there was good to the movie for the parts of the movie that didn't have to do with the writing. You could tell there were competent filmmakers making this movie with a lame script. Though I do commend the script for trying to be different from the vampire films we've been having lately, but instead of doing something new, it tried to go back to do something old that we had 20 years ago, and instead of breaking the molds, it just slipped out of them and didn't really slip into anything else. Though there were good things to it. I like that they pushed for a fairy tale-like quality with the cinematography and the storytelling to an extent, very Once Upon a Time-esque. I like that the romance was minimum and just used as a subplot instead of the focus of the movie. The vampire lore, where vampires come from, was interesting. The vampire politics, the sexism of the Brotherhood, and the way that they don't let women do anything was interesting and worth exploring. I like that the story was told in a frame structure of a story within a story within a story, very Frankenstein, and maybe that's where the movie got off comparing itself to Mary Shelley. Though some of the visuals were really pretty and not all of the effects were laughably bad, a lot of them were too literal. For instance, you have this image of her writing her story down, and then she rips the pages out of her diary and throws them away. And that's a powerful image of the impotence that she feels, that she can't be herself, that she has to throw her story to the wind. But then you have her voiceover saying, I throw my story to the wind. And any subtlety of metaphor or beauty of image that you were enjoying immediately lost, because they take that frying pan, they hit you over the head with it. That brings me to my actual problems with this movie. You thought those were my actual problems? No, those are just rants. I mean, I love vampire movies, and as we know, most vampire movies are not good movies. So I can forgive a lot and enjoy it for what there is, but here's my list of gripes. The villains were irredeemably shallow characters. There's two main antagonists. The first is the captain, who forces Clara into a life of being a whore. And why? Because he's evil, and that's what he does. I mean, this guy would be twirling his mustache if he had one, and every time there was a chance to add some complexity to this character, the movie just purposefully bashes against it. There's this point where he's telling Clara about how his friend was sick and he was urging his friend to go home, and Clara says, "Oh, that was nice of you." And he said, "No, actually, I was hoping the journey home would kill him." Wahaha. Okay, he doesn't laugh evilly, but it's pretty awful. Another point where he said, "Oh, I was helping my friend climb this mountain." "Oh, that was nice of you to help him." "No, I was hoping he would kill himself climbing that mountain." Just, why is this character so evil? He's not a minor character. He's in the movie a lot, but we don't get to know anything about him, what his problem is, why he's such a douchebag, and therefore we can't care. The second villain is a much more minor character. He's the overarching big bad, the leader of the Vampire Brotherhood. So of course we're not going to find out a lot about him, but why does he have this sexist political view of women can't create other vampires? Why does this brotherhood exist? I mean, I can speculate all I want, and maybe the movie's trying to make me think about that. Okay, fine. But he has the stupidest line in the entire movie. So at the end, right? Spoilers. He has Clara, and he's caught her, and he's about to chop off her head because she's an abomination, because she's a female vampire. And he takes out this huge, creepy-looking knife. And he stops and he says, "This is my knife from Byzantium. I had it ever since the Crusades." Okay. Why did he need to tell us that? Why the title drop? What does that have to do with that moment for him as a character? Yes, perhaps killing female vampires is a bit of a crusade for him, and the elitism and conflicting ideals of the Crusades do tie into this. I get that metaphor. Calling the movie Byzantium and naming the hotel where they live Byzantium, and the whole fallen empire thing, that served that metaphor. That served that purpose. We got it. Bringing it out and being like, by the way, character that I am, who you really are kind of just meeting for the first time, I was in the Crusades once, chop. Everyone in the theater laughed. I couldn't contain my giggles. It was just the stupidest line in the whole movie. Now, when it comes to the vampires, the rules of what they are different. I like that. I like that they can go out in the day, that they don't have fangs, that they feed in a different way. Mix it up. That's good. We need more of that. But they also were inconsistent. There's a scene where Clara's human boyfriend gets cut and he's gushing blood all over the place, so she helps him to get him home to his mother, and then the mother takes him off to the hospital and he drops the handkerchief that was holding the wound, and she looks down at it and you can see this look in her face like, oh my god, I want to suck the blood off that handkerchief, but that's gross and I don't want to do it and I'm fighting my nature and I can't. So she picks it up and she sucks it, and we're supposed to be like, oh, it's so conflicting to be a vampire that you do things like that. Yet when he was gushing blood all over her, we didn't see any conflict. We didn't see any struggle of her being like, perhaps I want to eat you now, boy that I like. Nothing. It's only there in the script when it's convenient. When it's inconvenient, not an issue. And there's no consequences to this moment of struggle that she has that the film seems to really want us to see. She sucks the blood out of the handkerchief, then nothing. It's not like she gets seen doing it. See, if she had jumped on her boyfriend when he's bleeding all over her in the street, that would have had some consequences. I mean, people would have saw, he would have been upset. If he lived, or she would have been ridden with guilt. No, instead, the movie decides to do this safe thing where she sucks it out of a handkerchief and we're supposed to think, oh, that's gross. Being a vampire must be kind of gross. Yeah, Let the Right One In did that and did it much better. And now for my biggest problem with this movie, which doesn't have to do with vampires so much as it has to do with women, is life begins at man. So Clara's backstory is that as a young girl, she had this job digging up cockle shells on the beach. And one day the captain comes along and picks her up and takes her to a brothel and turns her into a whore. And she goes with him and she doesn't put up a fight. how is this possible? Who was she that she was a respectable enough girl to have this job? It's not like she was a street urchin. She wasn't dirty. She was perfectly well dressed, obviously poor and down on her luck, but she didn't have a mother. She didn't have a family. There was no consequences to this happening. If she was dumb enough to just quietly go along with him and not put up a fight or not be confused, why didn't this happen before? She popped out of existence one day and this happened to her. And he brings her to the brothel, and the madam's like, oh, look, she'll be my new whore. Take her upstairs and defile her. The madam doesn't think, you've brought this respectable looking girl in, the police are gonna come looking for her, her parents are gonna be upset, I'm sure she has a family or friends somewhere or an employer. That's no consequences at all. It's just like the writer was like, how do I get this character to become a whore? Okay, one day this happens. Doesn't have any kind of backstory. Same goes for Eleanor, who, when as a whore, Clara gives birth to Eleanor and then gives her up, and then in the meantime, Clara goes off and becomes a vampire. So Eleanor is raised in this orphanage, a very respectable orphanage where Claire is paying for her. She's not Cosette at the inn living a horrible life. She's living in this fancy orphanage. But then one night, same guy comes as revenge against Clara, has the orphanage lady, gets Eleanor out of bed in the middle of the night, takes her down the hall and rapes her. And what kind of orphanage lets a creepy guy come in the middle of the night and lets a girl in her nightgown, undressed, go off with him, unchaperoned? It's just for the convenience of the plot. Even if he came in with some kind of story that made them believe he was respectable, even though obviously he's a sinister figure, he's dripping with disease. And they still would not have let her go off without putting some clothes on, and would not have looked after her. Not this kind of place, not the way the movie leads us to believe that this kind of place is, as a nice place because Clara cared enough about her daughter to put her in a nice place. And then, apparently, after this happens to Eleanor, she now is ready to die. Because to become a vampire, you have to be ready to die. So Clara takes her to the place where she became a vampire, the same place where everyone else became a vampire, this mysterious cave in this hell. Why is Eleanor ready to die after being raped? When this happened to Clara, she was traumatized too, but it made her become a fighter. It made her become resourceful. So Eleanor reacts the exact opposite way, which is a valid reaction. Obviously, she's gonna be traumatized to this horrible thing happening to her. But then her mother, who had the exact opposite reaction, supports that and says, okay, you're ready to die now. You've got syphilis or gonorrhea or whatever it is that he gave you, which will give you a slow death and a horrible life, and you've been ruined. So, yes, death is the answer. Not, when I was your age, I reacted differently. I was a fighter. I have this mantra now that I'm gonna punish all men. It's just, no, we need an excuse to turn you into a vampire, so we'll go with that. It just wasn't done in the movie in a way that I bought at all. It was just a hastily written backstory that was slapped in there and framed as this glorious, gothic, timeless story of women suffering. We can't, as an audience, feel for these horribly tragic characters if they aren't characters first before the tragedy. If life starts with tragedy, they become cliches, not anything meaningful. And what really bothered me about this film was its level of self-importance when it came to this. I mean, take indie, artsy vampire movies about women, compare this to The Moth Diaries, which I also saw at the IFC Art House Theater last year, which got much worse reviews than Byzantium, yet I was much more forgiving of. The difference between these two movies is that The Moth Diaries takes the tropes and the cliches and pays homage to them, but then just is its own story, does its own thing, has its characters, and they go through their struggles. Byzantium was trying to make all these statements, trying to break all these molds and failing, and it thought it was better than what it was homaging, and this movie almost felt disrespectful to me of the vampire tropes and of writing in general. And I could go on, but I'll leave it at that. And in conclusion, I would say that this movie is worth seeing. It does have some unique, original, and interesting things going for it. As a vampire movie, the differences are worthwhile. It may make you a little bit cheesed off in regards to the writing, and will probably make you a little bit bored in regards to the pacing, but I would say it's worth seeing, if only because it's the only vampire movie we have this year. And if you happen to live in New York or LA, see it on the big screen for the sake of the visuals. Otherwise, check it out when it's on Netflix. I'm the Maven of the Eventide, and please, can we have some more vampire movies? I thirst. Good evening. Again, I have very exciting news. I am going to Con Bravo in Canada in a month, the last weekend in July, and with me is going all of Shea Apocalypse except for the European faction, and many other members of Channel Awesome, which I'm sure you probably already know, but I am so excited about going, and I hope to see you all there. I am going to be on a Shea Apocalypse panel, That Guy with the Glasses thing, we have a 50 Shades of Green panel, 50 Shades of Green being the project that has consumed my life over the last 2 months. If you've been wondering where I've been, it's because I've been working on that, and you can hear all about it at Con Bravo. I will also be one of the judges for the Grand Masquerade, so if you have a costume, I can't wait to see it and judge you. I'm excited. So, join me in Con Bravo in Canada. Here is the website. I hope to see you there. It's going to be awesome.